Welcome to our analysis of what's happening in policy. Today, we're focusing all our attention on one massive piece of legislation, House Resolution 1. It's been informally called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, and it is truly transformative. If you find this kind of breakdown valuable, please take a quick second right now to like and subscribe. It really does help us out.
And it's impossible to overstate how central this legislation is right now. House Resolution 1 was signed into law on July 4th, 2025. It enacted these sweeping revisions across, well, everything. Taxes, federal spending, even the debt limit.
And the reason it could cover so much ground is because it was a reconciliation bill.
Exactly.
That's a key detail, isn't it? For anyone who's not familiar, what does that practically mean?
It means speed, and it means finality. Reconciliation uses an expedited process in the Senate. It allows a bill to completely avoid a filibuster, and it puts severe restrictions on any amendments.
So it's basically the go-to method when you have ambitious, controversial changes you just have to push through.
That's right. And in this case, it let them bundle everything from corporate tax law to food assistance into one single package.
Which brings us to our mission today. We need to unpack the competing stories around this bill. Is it for economic growth or is it a wealth transfer? And we really want to get into the specifics of who is affected, from corporations all the way down to families relying on federal support.
The first thing you notice in the source material is that there are two totally incompatible narratives about why this bill even exists.
Two different realities, almost.
Almost. The progressive critique, you see this from sources like the Center for American Progress, frames it very starkly. They argue the bill's real purpose is to enact the, and I'm quoting here, largest ever cuts to basic needs programs, just to fund tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy.
So in that view, it's not about growth. It's about restructuring the social contract.
Precisely. It's a fundamental change.
Okay, so that's one narrative. Austerity for the poor to fund tax cuts for the rich. What's the counterargument?
The conservative viewpoint is all about stimulating the economy. Sources like the Tax Foundation praise it for what they call pro-growth provisions.
Pro-growth like what, specifically?
They point to making individual tax cuts permanent, and especially to the improved expensing for business investment in R&D and equipment. They argue that those changes are going to, dramatically boost investment and growth.
But even they have some issues with it, right? I read that they don't see it as true tax reform.
Right. And that's a fascinating criticism.
It seems a little academic, given that the bill delivers so much of what they wanted. What's the distinction?
The distinction is about simplicity. True tax reform, in their view, should broaden the tax base and lower rates, make things simpler. But House Resolution 1 does the opposite. It introduces a lot of new, very specific, narrow tax breaks.
Targeted at certain industries.
Exactly. And that adds complexity, which they argue ultimately raises deficits instead of creating a simple, durable system.
So no matter which side you're on, everyone agrees it's a huge, complicated piece of legislation. And the effects aren't even immediate. Our sources noted dozens of staggered start and end dates over the next decade. This is going to be debated for years.
Let's just talk about the financial scale, because that really dictates the politics. The bill has an incredible $753 billion in broad-based domestic business tax cuts.
$753 billion.
Yeah. Just for context, that's about the same size as the business cuts in the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, there's another $61 billion for more generous deductions on business debt payments.
That is an enormous amount of money. Are there any strings attached? I mean, do businesses have to hire more people or raise wages to get these breaks?
And that's the core of the criticism.
Yeah.
The perspective from the Center for American Progress is that these breaks just pad the pocketbooks of the business owners.
Mm-hmm.
There are no requirements to share profits, hire staff, nothing. The benefit is unconditional.
Okay, but there are other parts that seem geared toward planning certainty for businesses, and even some for individuals.
Absolutely. One of the biggest changes is making the expensing for R&D and equipment purchases permanent.
So businesses can plan for the long term now.
Right. No more worrying about expiration dates for those key investments. It also makes the Opportunity Zone program permanent and adds new incentives for rural investment.
And there was that unique provision for individuals that caught my eye, the new deduction for overtime and tips. How does that work?
It's very targeted, and importantly, it's an above-the-line deduction.
Which means you don't have to itemize to claim it.
Exactly. So it's accessible to a lot more people. It runs for 4 years, from 2025 to 2028. The deduction for tips is capped at $25,000 a year, and it phases out for higher earners.
So it's really aimed at middle and lower income workers, people in the service industry.
Clearly, that's the target demographic.
So we have these generous tax cuts on one side. What about the other side? What new financial burdens does the bill create?
Well, on the revenue side, there's a new 1% excise tax on remittance transfers.
So money being sent out of the U.S. to other countries?
Yes, with a few exceptions. And then there's a really big shift targeting higher education endowments. It replaces the old 1.4% excise tax on certain private university endowments with a new tiered system.
A tiered system.
Yeah. The new rates can jump to 7%, 14%, or even 21%, depending on the size of the endowment. It's a way to pull revenue from the wealthiest schools.
Okay, so we've covered the cost of the tax cuts. Now let's get to how they're being paid for, which critics say is by overhauling these safety nets. Let's start with Medicaid.
The Medicaid changes are structural. They're permanent. Starting in early 2027, anyone eligible through the Medicaid expansion has to meet new work requirements.
Work requirements?
Yes, a minimum of 80 hours per month of work, community service, or some kind of educational activity.
That is a huge philosophical shift. What does the research say the consequences of that will be?
There are a couple of key concerns. First, the requirements themselves just create administrative burdens that could cause people to lose coverage, even if they're eligible.
So just the paperwork alone could knock people off.
It could. And second, starting in fiscal year 2029, adults over 100% of the poverty level will face much higher out-of-pocket costs. The research suggests this kind of cost sharing leads to worse access to care. Young adults in particular often just forego care if the costs are too high up front.
So it creates a barrier to entry even within the safety net itself. Now, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, also sees big changes, but these seem to hit the states first. Is that right?
That's right. The financial burden shifts dramatically to state budgets. The federal share of administrative costs for SNAP gets slashed in half, from 50% down to 25%.
So states now have to pick up 75% of the administrative tab.
They do, which forces them to either find more funding or cut corners on delivering the program.
And there's another layer on top of that related to error rates.
Yes, and this is a big one. Starting in fiscal year 2028, states will have to match a portion of the SNAP allotment costs based on their payment error rate. If your error rate is low, under 6%, it's a 5% match. But if it gets to 10% or higher, the state's match jumps all the way to 25%.
So this combination of work requirements and financial penalties seems like it would damage one of SNAP's core functions, its ability to respond to a recession.
It absolutely does. You can think of SNAP as a kind of macroeconomic shock absorber.
It's meant to expand automatically when the economy goes south.
Exactly. That's its counter-cyclical function. But by adding work requirements, you inhibit that. Eligibility is no longer just about income, it's about meeting these activity metrics.
And that slows the whole system down.
It creates friction right when you need the system to be fastest. And crucially, time spent just looking for a job doesn't count toward that 80-hour requirement.
The scope of this bill is just incredible. It goes far beyond taxes and welfare. It fundamentally changes energy policy and defense funding, too. Let's start with energy. It seems to be as much about what it cuts as what it funds.
That's a perfect way to put it. House Resolution 1 rescinds a lot of unobligated funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. This includes money for grants for forest landowners, low-carbon transportation grants, and a whole range of programs under NOAA.
NOAA. So things like coastal restoration and climate research.
Yes. Coastal restoration, marine sanctuaries, climate forecasting. That funding is just cut off.
And on the other side of that, I assume, is a big push for fossil fuels.
A very clear pivot, yes. The bill mandates the Interior Department make at least 4 million additional acres of federal land available for coal. It also lowers the minimum royalty rates for oil and gas development on federal lands, which makes it cheaper for companies to drill.
Is there anything in there for clean energy?
The one major item is an increase in the carbon dioxide sequestration tax credit, up to $17 per metric ton. So it incentivizes capturing and storing carbon.
Okay, shifting gears again. There's also a major long-term financial commitment to immigration enforcement.
A very substantial one. The bill provides $45 billion through fiscal year 2029 to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. And that money is specifically for increasing detention capacity for adults and families.
And Customs and Border Protection gets funding, too.
They do. Over $6 billion for new inspection and surveillance equipment. It's a sustained investment in border infrastructure.
We also have to touch on this student loan overhaul buried in this act.
The changes are huge, especially for future borrowers. For any new loans after July 1st, 2026, the bill terminates all current student loan repayment plans.
All of them.
All of them. And then for loans taken out after July 1st, 2027, it eliminates economic hardship and unemployment deferments entirely.
Wow. So those safety nets are just gone for future students.
They're gone. It significantly restricts the options for anyone who runs into financial trouble after they graduate.
And finally, just to illustrate how anything and everything can get packed into one of these bills, the provision about firearm silencers.
Right. It removes firearm silencers from the definition of a firearm under the National Firearms Act of 1934.
And it gets rid of the $200 tax on them. It really shows you how all-encompassing this thing is. So House Resolution 1 is this document of policy extremes. It's legislating huge tax incentives for corporations while at the same time enacting these deep structural changes to low-income assistance programs.
It's a perfect example of using that powerful reconciliation process to push through very different priorities all at once. The coherence, if you can call it that, is in the trade-off. It's using cuts and stricter eligibility in social programs to offset the cost of broad tax reductions.
It really does raise fundamental questions. And that brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. Given all these staggered implementation dates, some of the big tax cuts are temporary and expire in 2028, while the toughest Medicaid and SNAP changes don't even start until 2029. How might these different timelines shape our politics and our economy down the road? Will one set of policies become permanent while the others are constantly on the chopping block?